Have you ever sacrificed everything for someone, only to become invisible the moment they no longer needed you? The words catch in my throat as I stare at the wedding album on my coffee table. Pristine white pages filled with smiling faces. None of them mine. Despite funding half the celebration, I'm nowhere to be found among these carefully curated memories. Not a single photograph. Not one. But that's how life works, isn't it? People remember what you can do for them, not what you've already done. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Evelyn Mercer, and at 58 years old, I never expected to find myself starting over. The polished mahogany desk beneath my fingertips still feels foreign, even after 3 months in this corner office overlooking Harborview Bay. The golden afternoon light spills across financial reports, showing numbers that would have seemed impossible to me a decade ago. My investment portfolio had just crossed the $12 million threshold, a milestone I'd once dreamed of sharing with my family. Family. Such a complicated word. I wasn't always wealthy. My journey began in Larkfield, a forgotten industrial town where the factory whistles dictated the rhythm of life. My parents worked themselves to exhaustion at the textile mill, determined that their only daughter would have opportunities they never did. Every spare dollar went toward my education. "Your mind is the one thing no one can ever take from you, Evie," my father would say, his calloused hands gently patting my shoulder. When I earned a scholarship to Westridge University, I became the first person in our family to attend college. Those 4 years were transformative. I discovered my aptitude for finance and investment strategy. Something about the patterns in market fluctuations made perfect sense to me, like reading music or poetry. Where others saw confusing numbers, I saw opportunities and possibilities. My career began modestly at Pinnacle Financial, where I met my husband, Garrett. He was charming and ambitious, with a booming laugh that could fill a room. What began as a professional rivalry blossomed into romance, and within 2 years we were married in the botanical gardens overlooking the city. Our honeymoon was postponed. We were both too dedicated to our careers to take more than a long weekend away from the office. The first fracture in our marriage appeared when I received a promotion Garrett had been pursuing. He smiled at my celebration dinner, but the congratulations never reached his eyes. 6 months later, I discovered his affair with a junior analyst. Our divorce was finalized by our 5th anniversary. The settlement left me with our modest condo and not much else, but I had something more valuable: my career and financial acumen. While Garrett chased status symbols, expensive cars, designer clothes, club memberships, I focused on building wealth through strategic investments. I lived simply, well below my means, and watched my portfolio grow steadily. When my younger sister Corinne passed away unexpectedly from an aneurysm, leaving behind her 15-year-old twins, Brielle and Julian, I didn't hesitate. I welcomed them into my home and heart, becoming their legal guardian overnight. They were shattered by grief, and so was I. But somehow we formed a new kind of family among the fragments of our loss. Those early days were challenging. Teenage rebellion amplified by trauma made for volatile emotional storms. Julian would disappear for hours, returning with red-rimmed eyes and refusing to speak. Brielle locked herself in her room, the muffled sounds of sobbing seeping through the door. I arranged therapy, transferred them to good schools, and most importantly, gave them space to heal while ensuring they knew they weren't alone. "I'm not trying to replace your mother," I told them. One night over takeout pizza, the first meal they'd actually sat down for in weeks. No one could, but I promised Corinne long ago that if anything ever happened, I'd be there for you both. And I keep my promises. Slowly, carefully, we built trust. I attended every school event, helped with college applications, celebrated their victories, and provided sanctuary during defeats. When Julian's basketball team made it to state championships, I rearranged high-profile client meetings to be there, cheering until I was hoarse. When Brielle suffered her first heartbreak, we spent the entire weekend watching terrible movies and eating ice cream straight from the carton. By the time they graduated high school, the wounds had scarred over. Not healed completely, they never would, but manageable. We had inside jokes, holiday traditions. They started calling me Auntie Ev with genuine affection rather than awkward obligation. Julian received a partial scholarship to Barton University to study engineering, but it wasn't enough. College costs had skyrocketed, and his remaining expenses would still be substantial. Without hesitation, I covered the difference. Focus on your studies, I told him. This is an investment in your future. Brielle decided to pursue fashion design at the prestigious Archer Institute. The tuition was exorbitant, but her talent was undeniable. I liquidated some investments and paid the full amount up front for her entire program. When she worried about the cost, I showed her my portfolio performance. This is what money is for, I explained. To create possibilities. Throughout their college years, I maintained our connection despite the distance. Care packages during finals week, surprise visits when I had business near their campuses, emergency funds that never needed to be repaid. When Julian's ancient laptop died before a major project was due, a new one arrived at his dorm the next day. When Brielle needed industry-standard design software that wasn't covered by her program, the license appeared in her email without her having to ask. After graduation, Julian joined an engineering startup with tremendous potential but minimal initial salary. I helped with the down payment on his first condo, explaining the benefits of building equity instead of paying rent. Brielle struggled to find stable work in the competitive fashion industry, so I provided a monthly stipend while she interned at various ateliers, building her portfolio and connections. This isn't charity, I emphasized whenever they expressed guilt about my financial support. I believe in both of you. Consider it seed money for your futures. When Julian met Sophia during a business trip to Chicago, I knew immediately she was special. His entire demeanor changed when he spoke about her, the reserved, analytical engineer suddenly becoming poetic. After a whirlwind long-distance romance, he proposed. Sophia moved to Harborview Bay, securing a position at the Children's Hospital as a pediatric nurse. Their wedding planning coincided with a major professional achievement for me. After years of strategic investments and building my client base, I was offered a partnership at Stellaris Wealth Management, one of the most prestigious firms on the East Coast. The timing couldn't have been better. I wanted to give Julian and Sophia a wedding they'd remember forever. Let me handle the venue and catering, I offered during one of our Sunday brunches. The relief on Julian's face was immediate. Harborview Estate, overlooking the bay with its manicured gardens and historic mansion, was booked 18 months in advance. Except I had once helped the owner restructure his business investments during a financial crisis. One phone call, and the estate's best date in June was theirs. Sophia's parents, the Callaways, arrived from Chicago 2 weeks before the wedding. Vincent and Marjorie were old money, the kind that spoke in hushed tones about their philanthropy, while subtly inspecting everyone's clothing brands. Our first meeting was cordial but cool. I noticed the fleeting expressions of assessment whenever I mentioned my career or background. The unspoken question hung in the air. Who exactly was this unmarried aunt who had raised the groom? The Callaways have offered to contribute to the rehearsal dinner, Julian mentioned awkwardly after their third day in town. That's thoughtful, I replied, but it's already arranged. The private room at Maison has been reserved for months. It was the most exclusive restaurant in the city, requiring connections I'd cultivated over years. Actually, he hesitated, they were thinking somewhere more traditional. Vincent has connections at the Harborview Club. The Harborview Club, where membership was by invitation only, and the waiting list was rumored to be a decade long unless your family name was on a building somewhere. I see, I said carefully. If that's what you and Sophia prefer, of course we can change the plans. The rehearsal dinner at the Harborview Club was exquisite, if predictable. Old-world elegance, impeccable service, and absolutely no surprises. I was seated at a table with distant relatives rather than with the immediate family. When I questioned Julian about it later, he looked uncomfortable. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sophia's mother arranged the seating. Something about balancing the tables properly. In the days leading up to the wedding, I found myself increasingly sidelined. The bridal shower I wasn't invited to, the groomsmen's lunch I learned about, through social media. Small exclusions that pricked like needles but seemed too petty to mention. On the morning of the wedding, I arrived early at Harborview Estate, bringing Julian's favorite breakfast pastries and a vintage pocket watch that had belonged to my father. "Something old," I said, pressing it into his palm. He hugged me tightly, and for a moment, he was that 15-year-old boy again, seeking comfort in my arms after a nightmare. The ceremony was beautiful. Seeing Julian standing tall at the altar, watching his face transform as Sophia appeared, it was everything I had hoped for him. During the reception, I circulated among the guests, accepting congratulations as the aunt who raised him. The Callaways remained coolly polite, their smiles never reaching their eyes. "Family photos in 10 minutes, the wedding planner announced, after the main course. "Immediate family only, please gather by the rose arbor." I refreshed my lipstick and headed to the designated area, where the photographer was arranging lighting equipment. Sophia stood radiant in her gown, flanked by her parents, grandparents, and siblings. Julian joined them, adjusting his boutonniere nervously. Marjorie Calloway's eyes flicked to me, then quickly away. She leaned toward the photographer and murmured something. He nodded. "All right, bride's family first," he called out. Multiple configurations followed, Sophia with her parents, with her siblings, with extended family. Then Julian was incorporated, with Sophia and her parents, with the entire Calloway clan. I waited patiently at the edge of the garden. Minutes stretched uncomfortably. Finally, the photographer checked his list. "That's a wrap on the family portraits. Wedding party. You're next." I stepped forward. "Excuse me, we haven't done any with Julian's family." The awkward silence that followed seemed to stretch for eternity. The photographer glanced at his clipboard. "I don't have any more family groupings listed here." Julian wouldn't meet my eyes. Sophia looked nervously toward her mother, who stepped forward with a practiced smile. "We've taken all the necessary family combinations," Marjorie said smoothly. "We need to keep on schedule for the sunset photos." "But I'm Julian's family," I said, my voice catching slightly. "His only family." Vincent Calloway cleared his throat. "Perhaps we could do a quick one with the guardian." The word fell like a stone. Guardian. Not aunt, not family. Guardian. A legal designation, clinical and temporary. My role reduced to a formality that had expired with their adulthood. "No," I said quietly. "That won't be necessary." I retreated to my table, a strange numbness spreading through my chest. Later, as I prepared to leave, Julian approached, his expression conflicted. "Auntie Ev, I'm sorry about earlier. Things got confused with the photo schedule." "It's fine," I lied. "It was a beautiful wedding." "You're leaving already? We haven't cut the cake." "I have an early meeting tomorrow." Another lie. "You enjoy your night. Give Sophia my love." I kissed his cheek and walked away, the weight of invisibility settling heavily on my shoulders. 2 days later, Brielle called, bubbling with excitement. "Kieran proposed? Can you believe it? We're thinking next spring, and I've already found the perfect venue in Napa Valley. It's usually booked 3 years out, But they had a cancellation. Kieran Foster came from a family similar to the Callaways. Old money, impeccable credentials, and the subtle condescension that often accompanies generational wealth. I had met him only twice, finding him charming but somewhat calculating. Brielle had been dating him for just over a year, after meeting at a gallery opening where her designs were featured. "That's wonderful news," I said automatically, even as Julian's wedding photos flashed through my mind. The albums had been shared in the family group chat, dozens of images documenting the perfect day. Looking through them, it was as if I had never existed. "We need to talk budget," Brielle continued. "Kieran's parents want to contribute, of course, but the venue deposit is due next week." I closed my eyes, suddenly exhausted. "Why don't you come over for dinner tomorrow? We can discuss details then." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept returning to a memory from years earlier, Julian's college graduation. We had stood together for photos, his arm around my shoulders, both of us beaming with pride. "I wouldn't be here without you, Auntie Ev," he had said. "You know that, right?" Where had that Julian gone? Had he ever really existed, or had I simply been a convenient stepping stone, financially useful until he reached more elevated social circles? I opened my laptop and logged into my investment portfolio. The numbers were impressive, the result of decades of disciplined saving and strategic decision-making. I had always assumed Brielle and Julian would be my primary beneficiaries. I had even consulted with estate planners to ensure tax efficiency for their inheritance. For what? To be excluded from family photos? To be introduced as the guardian, rather than family? To have my role in their lives minimized and eventually erased? A new clarity washed over me. I had been operating under the illusion that financial support translated to genuine connection. But perhaps I had simply been an ATM with emotional benefits, convenient when needed, forgotten when inconvenient. The next evening, Brielle arrived precisely on time, a thick wedding planning binder tucked under her arm. Her engagement ring caught the light, at least 3 carats, emerald cut, in a vintage platinum setting. I served her favorite meal, herb-crusted, salmon with roasted vegetables, and listened as she detailed her vision for the wedding. The exclusive venue, the designer gown, the honeymoon in the Maldives. "The total budget is coming in around $165,000, she concluded, showing me a meticulously categorized spreadsheet. "Kieran's parents have offered $60,000, and we can contribute about $25,000 from our savings. So we were hoping you could cover the remaining $80,000. She smiled expectantly, as if requesting a coffee rather than a sum that exceeded many people's annual salary. "That's quite an investment," I said carefully. "I know it's a lot," she acknowledged, "but it's only once in a lifetime. And property values in Napa Valley are insane right now, so the venue alone." "I'm not talking about the money," I interrupted gently. "I'm talking about what it represents. A wedding is about joining families, celebrating connections. Tell me, Brielle, in this elaborate plan of yours, where do I fit in?" Her expression shifted to confusion. "What do you mean? You're my aunt. Of course you'll be there." Like I was there at Julian's wedding? Present but invisible? She flinched. "That was unfortunate. The Callaways can be traditional, but Kieran's family isn't like that." "Really? Because when I met Kieran's mother at your gallery show, she referred to me as your financial supporter. Not your aunt, not your family. My role was defined solely by my checkbook." "You're being oversensitive," Brielle protested. "It was probably just a misunderstanding." I rose and retrieved a folder from my desk. "I've been thinking a lot about family lately, about what it means and what it doesn't." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I've made some changes to my investment portfolio and estate plans." Her eyes widened slightly. "Changes? Yes, I've established a foundation for first-generation college students from Larkfield, full scholarships, mentorship programs, career placement assistance, the kind of support that transforms lives. That's great, she stammered. But what does that have to do with my wedding? Everything, and nothing. I slid the folder across the table. This is what I can offer toward your wedding. It's a gift of $10,000, a generous amount by normal standards, though perhaps disappointing compared to what you expected. She stared at the check, her expression cycling through shock, confusion, and finally, indignation. This isn't even enough for the flower arrangements. Is this some kind of joke? No joke, just clarity. I took a sip of wine. I've realized I've been making poor investment decisions when it comes to family. I've been putting all my capital, emotional and financial, into relationships with diminishing returns. So you're punishing me for Julian's wedding photos? That's ridiculous. This isn't punishment, Brielle. It's boundary setting. For too long, I've operated under the assumption that if I gave enough, money, time, love, I would eventually earn a secure place in your lives. But that's not how it works, is it? The moment something more prestigious comes along, the Callaways, the Fosters, I become an inconvenient reminder of less sophisticated origins. That's not fair, she protested, but her voice lacked conviction. Perhaps not. But neither is being treated as an open wallet rather than family. I closed the folder with finality. You and Julian will always be my family in my heart. My door will always be open. But from now on, my financial support will align with how I'm treated, not with how I hope to be treated. Brielle left in a storm of tears and accusations. Later that night, Julian called, his voice tight with controlled anger. What did you say to Brielle? She's completely upset. I simply clarified my position regarding her wedding expenses. This is because of the photos, isn't it? I already apologized for that. Did you? I asked quietly. I don't recall an apology. I recall an explanation about scheduling confusion. His sigh was heavy with exasperation. Look, I know the Callaways can be a bit much, but that's just how they are. You could have tried harder to fit in. Those words, you could have tried harder to fit in, crystallized everything. After raising him, supporting him, loving him unconditionally, I was the one who needed to try harder. I see, I said, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. In that case, I won't trouble you or the Callaways any further. I've revised my estate plans to reflect my current priorities. You and Brielle will each receive a modest trust fund, enough to remember me by, but not enough to require managing your expectations. Are you seriously threatening to disinherit us over wedding photos? Not threatening, informing, and not disinheriting, reallocating. The bulk of my estate will now fund educational opportunities for students who don't have family support. Because I know firsthand how valuable that is. There was a long silence before Julian spoke again, his voice lower. I never thought you'd put a price tag on your love. That's precisely my point, Julian. I never did. You did. The months that followed were difficult. Brielle's wedding plans were scaled back considerably. Julian and Sophia purchased a more modest home than they had been eyeing. There were attempts at reconciliation, holiday cards, occasional messages, even a dinner invitation that felt more obligatory than heartfelt. I remained polite but firm in my boundaries. I attended Brielle's wedding, bringing the $10,000 gift I had promised. I sent Julian and Sophia a thoughtful gift for their first anniversary. But the blank checks and unlimited financial support were things of the past. Instead, I poured my energy into establishing the Mercer First Generation Scholarship Foundation. I joined the board of the Larkfield Community Development Initiative. I mentored young financial analysts from disadvantaged backgrounds, and something unexpected happened. The weight of unmet expectations lifted. The desperate need for validation from Julian and Brielle faded. I rediscovered parts of myself that had been subsumed by my role as their provider and protector. I began dating again, cautiously at first, then with growing confidence. I met Malcolm, a widowed architecture professor with a dry wit and kind eyes, at a foundation fundraiser. Our relationship developed slowly, built on mutual respect and genuine interest rather than need or obligation. 3 years after Julian's wedding, I received a text message with an attached photo. It showed Sophia in a hospital bed, tired but radiant, holding a newborn wrapped in a blue blanket. Julian stood beside them, looking simultaneously terrified and awestruck. "Meet your great-nephew, Everett Julian Mercer," the message read. "Named after the strongest person we know. Can you visit tomorrow? Everett. After me. Evelyn." My vision blurred with unexpected tears. The following day, I entered the hospital room with a small gift bag containing a hand-knitted blanket and a savings bond. Sophia smiled warmly, gesturing for me to come closer. "Would you like to hold him?" she asked. As I cradled the tiny boy, his eyes, Julian's eyes, blinked up at me solemnly. "Thank you for coming, Auntie Ev," Julian said, his voice thick. "We've missed you." "I've missed you too," I admitted. "We've been doing a lot of thinking," Sophia continued, exchanging a look with Julian. "About family. About what matters." Julian pulled a chair close to the bed for me. "The past few years have been educational, living within our actual means, making our own way." "You don't have to," I began, but he shook his head. "No, I do have to say this. You were right, we took you for granted. Worse, we allowed others to diminish your role in our lives because it was easier than standing up for what we knew was true." He looked at his son, then back at me. "You're not just our aunt. You're the reason we became who we are. And we want Everett to know the real story of his family, not some sanitized version that fits better at country club dinners." Sophia reached for my hand. "We'd like you to be involved in Everett's life, not as a financial resource. We're managing fine, on our own now, but as family. Real family." I looked down at the sleeping infant, his tiny fingers curled around my thumb. "I'd like that very much." Later that week, a large envelope arrived at my home. Inside was a framed photograph from Julian's wedding, one I had never seen before. It showed Julian and me in the garden at Harborview Estate, his arm around my shoulders, both of us laughing at some forgotten joke. A candid moment captured between posed portraits. The note attached read simply, "The most important photo from that day. We just didn't realize it until now. Love, Julian and Sophia." I placed the frame on my mantel, next to new pictures of baby, Everett, and recent photos of Malcolm and me traveling through Europe. My collection of visible, acknowledged connections. Excluding Julian and Brielle from my investment portfolio had never been about punishment. It had been about redirecting my resources, financial and emotional, toward ventures with meaningful returns. Some of those returns had been unexpected, arriving years later in the form of genuine reconciliation. Others came through the scholarship. Students whose lives were transformed by opportunities they might never have had otherwise. The greatest return, though, was in rediscovering my own worth. Not as measured by what I could provide for others, but by the life I chose to create for myself. In the end, that was the most valuable investment of all. When I returned to my apartment that evening, the walls seemed to close in around me. The wedding album still lay open on my coffee table, a vivid reminder of my invisibility. I picked it up, my fingers tracing the glossy pages where I should have appeared but didn't. Sophia's parents, Vincent and Marjorie Calloway, gazed proudly from every formal portrait, their perfect smiles and impeccable attire broadcasting old money and social standing. Julian stood tall beside them, looking every inch the son-in-law they had envisioned, successful, handsome and completely detached from his actual origins. Origin stories matter. Mine began in Larkfield's east side, where factory smoke stained the horizon and opportunity felt as distant as the stars. My father's hands were permanently stained with machine oil, my mother's fingers calloused from years of alterations and mending. They weren't supposed to produce a daughter who would someday manage millions in assets. People from Larkfield worked with their hands, not with investment portfolios. Julian and Brielle knew this story. I had shared it with them countless times over the years, not as a plea for sympathy, but as a lesson in resilience. Your circumstances don't define your potential, I would tell them, but they do shape your perspective. Never forget where you came from, because it's part of who you are. Had they forgotten? Or had they simply decided that some origins were better left unacknowledged? I closed the album and tucked it away in my bookshelf, behind financial journals and investment guides. Out of sight, though certainly not out of mind. The following morning, I arrived early at my office, seeking refuge in the familiar rhythm of market analyses and client portfolios. Elise, my assistant, appeared at my door with a steaming cup of coffee and concern in her eyes. "You're here before 7, she observed. "Again. Third time this week." I accepted the coffee with a grateful nod. The markets wait for no one, especially not wedding hangovers. Speaking of which, how was Julian's big day? You've barely mentioned it. I hesitated, uncertain how to distill the complexity of my feelings into office-appropriate small talk. It was illuminating. Elise raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. Instead, she placed a folder on my desk. "The Donovan portfolio review is ready for your signature. And Mr. Harrington called about adjusting his retirement allocations. Apparently, his daughter just announced she's expecting twins." "Twins," I repeated softly, thinking of Corinne and how quickly life had changed when her children became mine. "Schedule him for tomorrow afternoon. I'll want to review his current distributions before we meet." After Elise left, I opened my email to find a message from Brielle with the subject line, "Big news." 3 exclamation points. Her enthusiasm practically leapt from the screen. The message contained only a single image, her left hand extended, a massive emerald-cut diamond catching the light. The caption read, "He asked. Kieran proposed last night at Lumiere. Wedding planning SOS incoming. Clear your calendar. Auntie Ev!" I stared at the image, conflicting emotions swirling. Genuine happiness for her finding love, apprehension about another round of wedding preparations, and beneath it all, a nagging question. Would history repeat itself? Would I once again be the financial backbone but social afterthought? Before I could formulate a response, my phone rang. Brielle's name flashed on the display. "Did you see my email?" she squealed the moment I answered. "Isn't it incredible? 4 carats, platinum setting, vintage cut. Kieran said it belonged to his great-grandmother." "It's beautiful," I said truthfully. "Congratulations, sweetheart. Kieran seems like a wonderful man." "He is," she gushed. "And his family is amazing. His mother is already talking about hosting an engagement party at their summer house in the Hamptons. Can you believe it? Me at a party in the Hamptons." The excitement in her voice was genuine, infectious even. This was the Brielle I knew, the girl who would stay up late sketching fashion designs, who saw beauty in unexpected places, who dreamed in colors and textures. "When are you thinking of having the wedding?" I asked, redirecting the conversation to practical matters. "That's actually why I'm calling," she said, her tone shifting to businesslike efficiency. "There's this absolutely perfect venue in Napa Valley, Rosewood Estate. It's usually booked 3 years out minimum, but they just had a cancellation for next May. We have to decide by the end of the week or we'll lose the date." "Next May? That's barely 9 months away." I know, but it's meant to be. May was my mom's favorite month, The weather will be perfect and the vineyard will be in bloom. It's going to be magical. The mention of Corinne sent a familiar pang through my chest. Your mother would have loved that. She would, Brielle agreed, her voice softening momentarily before returning to its excited pitch. Anyway, we need to put down a deposit to secure the date. It's substantial. $50,000. I nearly choked on my coffee. $50,000 for just the deposit? The venue is exclusive, she explained, as if I might not understand the concept. It includes the ceremony location, reception hall, catering, and 3 days of accommodation. For the wedding party, the total venue cost is around $120,000. The numbers spun in my head, not because I couldn't afford them, but because of the casual way she presented them. No acknowledgement of the magnitude of the request, no hesitation or humility, just expectation. That's quite an investment, I said carefully. I know it's a lot to ask, she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. But Kieran's parents are contributing to other aspects of the wedding. His mother is handling the rehearsal dinner at Le Bernardin. They've already reserved the private dining room. And his father insists on purchasing our first home as a wedding gift. Can you imagine? A house as a wedding present. The Fosters were outdoing the Callaways in conspicuous generosity, and I was expected to match their grand gestures, if not exceed them. Why don't we meet for dinner this weekend? I suggested. We can discuss the details more thoroughly. Perfect. I'll bring my planning binder. Oh, and Kieran might join us if that's okay? His mother gave me the contact information for her wedding planner. She's done events for actual celebrities. After we disconnected, I sat motionless, staring out my office window at the harbor below. Sailboats cut clean white lines across the blue water, their movements dictated by winds I couldn't see but whose effects were unmistakable. I felt similarly directed by invisible currents, expectations, traditions, obligations, pushing me toward predictable outcomes. But winds can change, and so could I. I reached for my desk phone and dialed my wealth manager, Cameron Reeves. Evelyn, he greeted warmly. I was just about to call you. The Mueller acquisition is proceeding as predicted. Your positions are up 17% since last quarter. That's good news, I acknowledged. But I'm calling about something else entirely. I'd like to schedule a complete portfolio review and estate planning session. Of course. Is there something specific prompting this? I paused, considering how much to share. Let's just say I'm reevaluating my legacy priorities. I need to ensure my assets are aligned with my values. I understand completely. I have an opening next Tuesday at 2. Would that work? Perfect. And Cameron? I'd appreciate your discretion on this matter. Always, Evelyn. That's why you pay me the big bucks. The weekend arrived with unseasonable warmth, a last breath of summer before autumn claimed the city. I reserved a quiet corner table at Terrasse, an upscale French bistro that had become something of a tradition for celebrating milestones with Julian and Brielle. The restaurant held memories of college acceptance announcements, graduation celebrations, new job toasts, moments when my pride in them had been uncomplicated and pure. Brielle arrived 15 minutes late, her face flushed with excitement. She wore a cream silk blouse that highlighted her golden skin, and her engagement ring caught the candlelight with every gesture. Kieran followed closely behind, tall and immaculately dressed in a casual but clearly expensive button-down and tailored trousers. His handshake was firm, his smile practiced but not entirely warm. Sorry we're late, Brielle apologized, kissing my cheek. We were at the Thompsons' gallery opening and lost track of time. Valeria Thompson is considering featuring some of my designs in their winter showcase. That's wonderful news, I said sincerely, gesturing for them to sit. The Thompsons have excellent taste. Kieran draped his arm casually across the back of Brielle's chair. Valeria was quite impressed when she learned Brielle had been personally mentored by you. Apparently, you advised her husband on some tech investments a few years back? Harold Thompson was an early client, I confirmed. Though I wouldn't call our relationship mentorship, more mutual respect between professionals. Of course, Kieran nodded, his expression suggesting he understood the nuance, though I doubted he did. My father speaks highly of your firm's performance record. Very impressive for a boutique operation. The subtle condescension wasn't lost on me. Stellaris managed billions, not the hundreds of billions handled by the multinational firms, but our client retention and performance metrics outpaced most of our larger competitors. We prefer to think of ourselves as selective rather than small, I replied evenly. Quality over quantity has served us well. Brielle, sensing the subtle tension, quickly redirected the conversation. I brought the preliminary wedding plans, she announced, producing an elegant leather folio embossed with her initials. We've already secured the florist who did the Westfield Pierce wedding last year. You remember those stunning arrangements that were featured in Vogue? For the next hour, I listened as Brielle detailed her vision for the wedding. The hand-calligraphed invitations on imported paper, the custom-designed gown from an up-and-coming atelier, the 10-piece orchestra for the ceremony transitioning, to a renowned DJ for the reception. With each extravagant element, the budget ballooned. So the current total is approximately $165,000, she concluded, showing me a meticulously organized spreadsheet. Kieran's parents have generously offered to cover $60,000, and we can contribute about $25,000 from our savings. So we were hoping you might consider handling the remaining $80,000. She delivered the request with such matter-of-fact confidence that for a moment, I almost nodded automatically. This was, after all, what I had always done, provided whatever they needed without question. But something stopped me. Perhaps it was the memory of standing alone at the edge of the rose arbor, watching Julian smile for photos with his new family. Perhaps it was Kieran's earlier subtle dismissal of my career accomplishments. Or perhaps it was simply the accumulated weight of years of giving without reciprocity. That's quite a substantial sum, I said carefully. I know, Brielle acknowledged, though her tone suggested she didn't fully grasp the magnitude. But it's only once in a lifetime. And you've always said that experiences are more valuable than possessions. I have said that, I agreed. But I think we need to discuss what this wedding represents beyond just the event itself. Brielle's expression shifted to confusion. What do you mean? A wedding is about joining families, celebrating connections. I'm curious where I fit into this elaborate plan of yours. What do you mean? You're my aunt. Of course you'll be there. Like I was there at Julian's wedding? Present but invisible? Her cheeks flushed slightly. That was unfortunate. The Callaways can be traditional, but Kieran's family isn't like that. Really? I turned to Kieran. Because when we met at Brielle's gallery show last spring, your mother referred to me as her financial supporter. Not her aunt, not her guardian, not even a family friend. My relationship to Brielle was defined solely by my checkbook. Kieran had the grace to look uncomfortable. My mother sometimes speaks imprecisely. I'm sure she meant no offense. And yet offense was taken, I replied calmly. Just as I took offense when Julian's new in-laws deemed me unworthy of inclusion in family photographs. Auntie Ev, Brielle interjected, her voice taking on a placating tone I recognized from childhood negotiations over bedtimes and curfews. I understand you felt slighted at Julian's wedding. That was terrible. But I promise my wedding will be different. You'll be seated at the family table, right beside me. Her words should have been reassuring. Instead, they highlighted exactly what was wrong. In her mind, proper seating arrangements would compensate for years of treating me as an ATM with emotional benefits. The transactional nature of our relationship had never been clearer. I reached into my bag and retrieved a sealed envelope, placing it on the table between us. "I've given this a great deal of thought. This is what I can offer, toward your wedding expenses." Brielle eagerly reached for the envelope, a smile spreading across her face. It faltered when she opened it to find a check for $10,000, a generous gift by normal standards, but far less than the $80,000 she had requested. "There must be some mistake," she said, her voice small. "No mistake," I assured her. $10,000 is my gift to you for your wedding. It comes with no strings attached and no expectations. You're free to use it however you see fit." Kieran studied me with newfound interest, as if recalculating some internal assessment. Brielle simply stared at the check, her expression cycling through confusion, hurt, and finally, indignation. "This isn't even enough for the floral arrangements," she protested. "We can't possibly keep the date at Rosewood with this." "Perhaps you could consider a venue within your actual budget," I suggested gently. "Is this because of Julian's wedding photos?" she demanded, her voice rising. "Are you punishing me for something I had no control over?" "This isn't punishment, Brielle. It's clarity. For years, I've operated under the assumption that if I gave enough, financially and emotionally, I would eventually secure my place in your lives. But recent events have made me realize that's not how relationships work." "So, you're just cutting us off?" Tears welled in her eyes, though whether from genuine hurt or frustrated expectations, I couldn't tell. "Not at all. I'm simply aligning my financial support with the reality of our relationship. $10,000 is a generous gift from a loving aunt to her niece. $80,000 would be an investment in a relationship that, frankly, hasn't demonstrated equivalent returns." Kieran shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Perhaps we should discuss this another time when emotions aren't so raw." "That won't be necessary," I said, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. "My position is firm. I love you, Brielle, and I want you to have a beautiful wedding that reflects your relationship with Kieran. But I won't bankroll an extravagant event simply because you've come to expect unlimited financial support." Brielle stood abruptly, tears now streaming down her face. "I can't believe you're doing this, after everything we've been through together." "Yes, everything we've been through," I echoed. "That's precisely my point. I've been there through everything. The nightmares after your mother died, the college applications, your first heartbreak, your struggle to break into the fashion industry. I've supported you emotionally and financially without hesitation. And in return, I've been treated as an accessory, useful when needed, invisible when inconvenient." "That's not fair," she protested. "Perhaps not, but neither is being valued only for my checkbook." She snatched up the check, crumpling it slightly in her fist. "Keep your money, we'll figure something out without you." As she stormed toward the exit, Kieran lingered briefly at the table. His expression had shifted from discomfort to something like reluctant respect. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I think you're right, about all of it." Then he hurried after Brielle, leaving me alone with the untouched appetizers and half-empty wine glasses. The waiter approached cautiously, clearly having witnessed enough to sense the tension. "Would you like the rest of this packed to go?" "No," I replied, suddenly exhausted. "Just the check, please." When I arrived home, my apartment felt emptier than usual. I poured myself a glass of Cabernet and stepped onto my balcony, gazing out at the twinkling city lights. Families were gathered in dining rooms across the harbor, sharing meals and conversations, building the invisible bonds that held them together. I had always assumed I was constructing those same bonds with Julian and Brielle, one sacrifice at a time. But perhaps I had been building on sand instead of bedrock. My phone buzzed with a text from Julian. "What did you say to Brielle?" "She's completely devastated. Call me ASAP." I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I returned to my living room, and retrieved a photo album from the bookshelf. Not Julian's wedding album, but one much older. It contained photographs from those first difficult months after Corinne's death. Julian and Brielle, 15 and heartbroken, their faces still round with childhood despite the adult grief in their eyes. Me, younger and more uncertain, learning to navigate parenthood without a manual. There we were at their high school graduations, the twins' faces alight with achievement despite the shadow of their mother's absence. Brielle clutching her acceptance letter to the Archer Institute, Julian proudly wearing his Barton University sweatshirt. Weekend visits to their colleges, care packages spread across dorm room beds, celebratory dinners marking the end of difficult semesters. A lifetime captured in snapshots, not just financial support, but presence. Consistent, unwavering presence. When had that stopped being enough? When had money become the primary measure of my love? The truth was uncomfortable, but unavoidable. I had enabled their expectation that my resources were limitless and unconditional. By never saying no, I had created a dynamic where my value was inextricably linked to what I could provide, rather than who I was. My phone buzzed again with another text from Julian. "Mom's asking about you. She hasn't seen you since the wedding. When are you visiting?" Mom. The word stopped me cold. Julian's biological mother had been dead for nearly 20 years. He was referring to Sophia's mother, Marjorie Calloway, the woman who had orchestrated my exclusion from the family photos. Something shifted inside me, like tectonic plates finally releasing built-up pressure. With sudden clarity, I understood that I needed to completely recalibrate my relationship with Julian and Brielle. Not out of spite or punishment, but out of self-preservation and truth. I finally responded to Julian's text. "We need to talk, in person. Tomorrow morning at my office, 9 a.m. His reply came almost immediately. "Can't tomorrow. Having brunch with Sophia's parents? Sunday?" Of course. Brunch with the Calloways took precedence over an urgent conversation with the woman who had raised him. The pattern was so clear, now that I wondered how I had missed it for so long. "This isn't optional," I texted back. 9 a.m. tomorrow, or we can discuss this through my attorney instead. That got his attention. "Attorney? What are you talking about?" "Fine, I'll be there." I set my phone aside and returned to the balcony, feeling lighter despite the confrontation looming ahead. For the first time in years, perhaps decades, I was prioritizing my own well-being over Julian and Brielle's expectations. The sensation was foreign, but not unwelcome. The following morning, I arrived at my office early. "The weekend security." Guard nodded respectfully as I signed in. "Working on a Saturday, Ms. Mercer? That's dedication." "Some conversations are better had on neutral ground," I replied with a small smile. I spent the next hour reviewing the documents Cameron had prepared during our meeting earlier in the week. The revisions to my estate plan were substantial, but fair. Julian and Brielle would each receive a trust fund of $250,000. Enough to remember, me by, but not enough to dramatically alter their lifestyles. The bulk of my assets would be directed toward the newly established Mercer First Generation Scholarship Foundation, providing full-ride scholarships to students from Larkfield and similar communities. When Julian arrived, precisely at 9, his expression was a mixture of irritation and concern. He wore casual weekend attire, designer jeans, and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "What's going on?" he demanded before even taking a seat. "First, you cut off Brielle, and now you're threatening legal action? This isn't like you, Auntie Ev." "Actually, this is exactly like me," I replied calmly. "I'm being direct and honest. About my boundaries, something I should have done years ago." He sank into the chair across from my desk, suddenly looking younger and more vulnerable. "Is this about the wedding photos?" I already apologized for that misunderstanding. "Did you?" "I don't recall an apology. I recall an explanation about scheduling confusion." He had the grace to look slightly ashamed. Look, I know the Callaways can be a bit much, but that's just how they are. You could have tried harder to fit in. Those words, "you could have tried harder to fit in," crystallized everything. After raising him, supporting him, loving him unconditionally, I was the one who needed to try harder. "In your mind," I said quietly, "what exactly is my role in your life, Julian?" He blinked, taken aback by the directness of the question. "What do you mean? You're my aunt." "Am I?" "Because from where I'm sitting, it seems I'm a convenient financial resource when needed, and an inconvenient reminder of less sophisticated origins when not." "That's not fair," he protested. "Isn't it? You referred to Marjorie Callaway as Mom in your text last night. Has she earned that title by loving you, raising you, sacrificing for you, or simply by being wealthy and socially connected?" His face flushed. "That's different. She's Sophia's mother. It makes things easier to call her that." "Easier for whom? Certainly not for me, who has been the only mother figure in your life since you were 15. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Look, I don't know why we're suddenly dissecting terminology. What's this really about?" I opened the folder on my desk and slid it toward him. "I've revised my estate plans to reflect my current priorities. You and Brielle will each receive a modest trust fund, enough to remember me by, but not enough to require managing your expectations." He stared at the document, the color draining from his face as he processed the implications. "Are you seriously disinheriting us over wedding photos?" "Not disinheriting, reallocating. And not over wedding photos, but over what they represent." I leaned forward, meeting his gaze directly. "The photos were merely a symptom of a deeper problem. You and Brielle have come to see me primarily as a financial resource rather than family. When presented with a choice between acknowledging your actual origins and embracing a more prestigious narrative, you chose the latter." "That's not true," he insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. "Isn't it? When Sophia's mother arranged the seating at your rehearsal dinner, placing me with distant relatives rather than with immediate family, did you object? When the photographer excluded me from family portraits, did you insist I be included? When Brielle requested $80,000 for her wedding, not as a heartfelt discussion but as a foregone conclusion, did she consider what that represented in terms of my life's work?" Julian remained silent, his eyes fixed on the estate. "Documents." "I don't blame you entirely," I continued, my voice softening. "I enabled this dynamic by never setting boundaries, by making my love and support, financial and otherwise, unconditional and unlimited. So now you're punishing us for taking what you freely offered." His tone had an edge of bitterness. "No. I'm simply recalibrating our relationship to reflect reality rather than my wishful thinking. My door will always be open to you both. My love remains unconditional, but my financial support will now align with how I'm treated, not with how I hope to be treated." He stood abruptly, anger replacing his initial shock. "I never thought you'd put a price tag on your love." "That's precisely my point, Julian. I never did. You did." I closed the folder with finality. The foundation I'm establishing will provide opportunities for students who don't have family support, because I know firsthand how valuable that is. "This conversation isn't over," he warned, moving toward the door. "Actually, it is," I replied calmly. "The papers have already been filed. The foundation charter is approved. All that remains is for you and Brielle to decide what kind of relationship you want with me moving forward, one based on genuine connection or none at all." After he left, I sat quietly in my office, watching sailboats navigate the harbor below. The confrontation had been painful but necessary, like lancing a wound to allow healing to begin. My phone buzzed with a text from Elise. "Client dinner with the Donovans still on for Tuesday?" I smiled slightly at the ordinary question, the return to normalcy. Yes, I replied. Reserve our usual table at Maison. Life would continue. Markets would fluctuate. Clients would require guidance. And somewhere in the midst of it all, perhaps Julian and Brielle would come to understand that the most valuable things I had ever given them weren't financial at all. That evening, I met Cameron for dinner at a small Italian restaurant in the West End, far from the upscale establishments where I might encounter the Callaways or Fosters. Over handmade pasta and an excellent Barolo, we discussed the finalized foundation structure. The paperwork is complete, he confirmed. The Mercer First Generation Scholarship Foundation will be fully operational by the end of the quarter. The board members you selected have all confirmed their participation. Good, I said, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. How soon can we begin accepting applications? We could have a pilot program running by next fall's academic term. I've already reached out to the guidance counselor at Larkfield High School. She's cautiously optimistic about identifying qualified candidates. Cautiously optimistic, I echoed with a small smile. That seems appropriate for Larkfield. Hope always comes with reservations there. Cameron studied me over the rim of his wine glass. May I speak frankly, Evelyn? Always. I've managed your finances for over a decade. In that time, I've watched you structure your entire life around providing for your niece and nephew. This shift, while I believe it's healthy, represents a fundamental reorientation of your priorities. Are you certain you're ready for what that means? I considered his question carefully. What it means is that for the first time in 20 years, I'm putting myself first, not out of selfishness, but out of honesty. Julian and Brielle need to build their own lives, just as I need to reclaim mine. And if they cut ties completely? If this estrangement becomes permanent? The possibility sent a sharp pain through my chest, but I pushed through it. Then that will be their choice. I can't control their responses, only my own actions. He nodded, seemingly satisfied with my resolution. To new beginnings, then, he said, raising his glass. To truth, I countered, touching my glass to his. As I drove home that night, the city lights blurred through a light rain, creating halos of color against the darkness. I thought about Julian and Brielle, about the children they had been and the adults they had become. I thought about Corinne, who had trusted me to guide her children through life's complexities. And I thought about myself, the woman I had been, the woman I was becoming. The rain intensified as I pulled into my building's garage. By the time I reached my apartment door, thunder rumbled in the distance, a perfect accompaniment to the tumultuous emotions of the day. I stepped inside to find a small envelope had been slipped under my door. Inside was a single photograph, one I had never seen before. It showed Julian and me in the garden at his wedding, caught in a moment of unguarded laughter. On the back, written in his familiar scrawl, not all photos were staged, not all moments were false. I held the image for a long moment, then carefully placed it on my mantle. A reminder that relationships, like investments, could be complex, volatile, and still ultimately valuable. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities for growth. But tonight, I would sleep knowing I had finally spoken my truth after years of silence. Whatever came next would be built on honesty rather than expectation, and that alone was worth the risk of loss. The months that followed were a strange mixture of liberation and loneliness. Autumn faded into winter, the harbor waters turning slate gray beneath increasingly cloudy skies. I immersed myself in work, taking on new clients and mentoring younger analysts at the firm. The Mercer First Generation Scholarship Foundation began to take shape, with an advisory board comprised of educators, financial experts, and community leaders from Larkfield. Each step forward in establishing the foundation felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I had unknowingly surrendered years ago. Communication with Julian and Brielle became sparse and formal. Julian sent a terse email informing me they had purchased a more modest home than originally planned, the implication being that my financial withdrawal had forced them to compromise. Brielle's wedding plans were significantly scaled back, the Napa Valley dream replaced by a ceremony at a local botanical garden. The invitations arrived in late November, cream-colored cardstock in a simple envelope, elegant, but far from the hand-calligraphed luxury she had initially envisioned. I marked the date in my calendar and sent a polite RSVP. Despite everything, I would not miss Brielle's wedding. Some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. During this period of readjustment, I found myself reconnecting with parts of my life I had neglected while focusing on Julian and Brielle. I joined a book club that met monthly at a small wine bar near the harbor. I took a cooking class specializing in Mediterranean cuisine. I even accepted an invitation to serve on the board of the Harborview Arts Council, something I had declined years earlier due to family commitments. One evening in early December, while reviewing grant applications for the foundation, my doorbell rang unexpectedly. I opened it to find Malcolm Whitaker, the Arts Council chairman, holding a bottle of wine and looking slightly sheepish. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said, glancing at the papers spread across my coffee table. "The council meeting ended earlier than expected, and I remembered you mentioning you lived in this building." Malcolm was a widowed architecture professor, with thoughtful eyes and a quiet confidence I found intriguing. We had spoken extensively at several council meetings, discovering shared interests in urban development and historical preservation. "Not interrupting at all," I assured him, stepping aside to invite him in. "I was just reviewing scholarship applications." He handed me the wine, a Bordeaux with an excellent vintage, and moved toward my floor-to-ceiling windows. "What an extraordinary view of the harbor. You can see all the way to North Point from here." "It's particularly beautiful at sunset," I replied, retrieving wine glasses from the kitchen. "Though in winter, that happens before I even leave the office most days." As I poured the wine, Malcolm's gaze fell on the photograph Julian had slipped. "Under my door, now framed and displayed on the mantel." "Family?" he inquired. "My nephew," I said simply, handing him a glass. "From his wedding last summer." Something in my tone must have revealed more than I intended, because Malcolm's expression softened with understanding. "Family relationships can be complicated," he observed. "My late wife and I were never able to have children, but her siblings' kids provided plenty of drama over the years." The simple acknowledgement that family could be both precious and painful opened a door between us. Over the next few hours, the wine bottle emptied as conversation flowed effortlessly from architecture to literature to our respective journeys, through grief and recovery. "Catherine died 7 years ago," Malcolm explained, his voice gentle with remembrance rather than raw with pain. "Pancreatic cancer. By the time they caught it, there were limited options. She chose quality of life over aggressive treatment, 3 months from diagnosis to the end." "I'm so sorry," I said, meaning it deeply. He nodded in acknowledgement. "The first year was almost impossible, the second marginally better. By the third, I could sometimes go whole days without that crushing weight on my chest. Now I can remember her with more joy than sorrow, but I'll never stop missing her." His honesty about grief resonated with my own experience after Corinne's death. "My sister died suddenly," I found myself saying. "An aneurysm. One moment she was planning her twin's 16th birthday party, the next she was gone. No warning, no goodbye." "And you raised her children," Malcolm said, connecting the dots from earlier conversations. "I did. They were 15 when she died. Now they're both in their 30s, building their own lives." I hesitated, then added, "We're in a period of readjustment in our relationship." Malcolm didn't press for details, instead shifting the conversation to lighter topics. When he finally left around midnight, he asked if I might be interested in attending a gallery opening with him the following weekend. I surprised myself by saying yes without hesitation. That night, lying in bed, I realized it had been the first evening in months where Julian and Brielle hadn't dominated my thoughts. The realization brought both relief and a twinge of guilt, as if moving forward somehow betrayed my commitment to them. But perhaps that was precisely the problem. I had defined myself solely through my relationship to them for too long. The week before Brielle's wedding, I received an unexpected visitor at my office. Kieran Foster arrived promptly at 3, as arranged with Elise, looking professional but slightly uncomfortable in an impeccably tailored suit. "Thank you for seeing me," he said as he took a seat across from my desk. "I know things have been strained between you and Brielle." "That's putting it mildly," I acknowledged. "What can I do for you, Kieran?" He hesitated, clearly choosing his words carefully. "Brielle doesn't know I'm here. She'd probably be furious if she found out." My curiosity piqued. "Then why risk her anger?" "Because I think she's making a mistake." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Not marrying me. At least I hope that's not the mistake. But allowing this rift between you to continue." "The rift wasn't my choice," I reminded him. "I know. And that's partly why I'm here." He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew an envelope. "This is the check you gave Brielle for the wedding. She never cashed it." I stared at the envelope, still sealed with my handwriting visible on the front. "Pride is an expensive luxury." "It is," he agreed. "But this isn't just about pride. It's about understanding, or rather, misunderstanding." He explained that after our dinner confrontation, Brielle had been devastated, not primarily by the reduced financial support, but by what she perceived as my rejection of her. She kept saying, "She doesn't think I love her. She thinks I only care about her money." Kieran's voice softened. When I asked if that was true, if she only valued your financial support, she broke down completely. She spent hours showing me old photo albums, telling stories about weekends at the beach house, middle-of-the-night calls when design projects went wrong, how you attended every single one of her student fashion shows even when you had to fly across the country to make it. I felt my carefully constructed emotional defenses beginning to crack. Those memories are precious to me too. I think what hurt her most wasn't the money itself, but feeling that those memories meant nothing to you, that you could reduce your entire relationship to a financial transaction. His observation struck uncomfortably close to home. Hadn't I accused Julian and Brielle of doing exactly that, reducing our relationship to financial support? In my hurt over their behavior, had I inadvertently done the same? "The wedding is in 3 days," Kieran continued. "It's smaller than we originally planned, but honestly, it feels more like us this way, more authentic." "Why are you telling me this, Kieran?" "Because despite everything, you're the closest thing to a mother Brielle has. When she imagined her wedding as a little girl, I guarantee she pictured you there in the front row." He stood to leave, placing the uncashed check on my desk. "Just something to think about." After he left, I sat motionless, staring at the envelope. The easy path would be to maintain my position, to hold firm to the boundaries I had established. But relationships, real, messy, human relationships, rarely benefit from rigid adherence to principle at the expense of connection. The day of Brielle's wedding dawned clear and crisp, unseasonably warm for December. I arrived at the Botanical Garden Conservatory an hour before the ceremony, carrying a small package wrapped in silver paper. The space had been transformed, with twinkling lights and winter blooms, elegant in its simplicity. I found Brielle in a small side room, already dressed in her gown, not the couture creation she had originally described, but a vintage-inspired design that complemented her slender frame perfectly. When she saw me in the doorway, she froze, her eyes widening with uncertainty. "Kieran told me he visited you," she said quietly. "He cares about you deeply," I replied. "That's evident." An awkward silence stretched between us. Years of love and recent hurt creating a chasm neither of us quite knew how to bridge. Finally, I held out the small package. "This isn't a replacement for what you expected," I said carefully. "But I thought you might want to wear it today." She unwrapped the package with trembling fingers to reveal a vintage pearl and sapphire hairpin. "This was Mom's," she whispered, recognition dawning in her eyes. "She wore it at her wedding. Your father gave it to her. After she died, I kept it for you. For this day." Tears welled in Brielle's eyes. "I thought, when you withdrew the money, that you didn't want to be part of this." "Money is just money," I said softly. "It can be given and taken away. But family, real family, that's something else entirely." She stepped forward then, closing the distance between us, and I opened my arms to her. As she cried against my shoulder, I felt my own tears falling. "I'm sorry," she murmured, "for taking you for granted, for not standing up for you at Julian's wedding, for expecting rather than appreciating. And I'm sorry for letting hurt. Feelings overshadow everything else," I replied. "For forgetting that relationships can't be measured in dollars and cents." When we separated, her makeup was smudged, but her smile was genuine. "Will you help me put it in?" she asked, holding up the hairpin. As I carefully secured the heirloom in her upswept hair, the door opened and Julian entered, stopping short when he saw me. "Auntie Ev," he said, his voice a mixture of surprise and uncertainty. "Julian?" I acknowledged, stepping back to admire my handiwork with Brielle's hair. He glanced between us, assessing the atmosphere. "Is everything? Are you two?" "We're finding our way back," Brielle answered for both of us. Slowly. Julian nodded, his expression softening. "Good, that's good." He hesitated, then added, "Sophia's sorry she couldn't be here. Morning sickness has been rough." The casual mention caught me off guard. "Sophia's pregnant?" A flicker of guilt crossed his face. 12 weeks yesterday. We were going to tell everyone after the first trimester. The news that I would be a great aunt, that Julian was becoming a father, that life was continuing its forward march despite our estrangement, hit me with unexpected force. "Congratulations," I said, meaning it sincerely. The ceremony was intimate and heartfelt, Brielle and Kieran exchanging vows they had written themselves beneath a canopy of winter jasmine and white roses. I sat in the front row, as Kieran had. Predicted, my heart full with complicated emotions, joy for Brielle's happiness, lingering hurt from past exclusions, cautious hope for healing. At the reception, Julian approached my table during a lull in the dancing. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the empty chair beside me. I nodded, and he sat down, adjusting his tie nervously. "Brielle told me about your conversation earlier, about finding a way forward." "It's a process," I said carefully. "Trust, once broken, doesn't mend overnight." "I know." He stared at his hands for a moment before continuing. "When Sophia told me she was pregnant, my first thought was panic. Not because I don't want children, but because I suddenly realized the weight of responsibility that comes with parenthood, and that made me think of you and everything you took on for us." His admission created an opening, not for absolution, but for honesty. "It wasn't always easy," I acknowledged, "but it was always worth it. Even now, even after everything?" I considered the question seriously. "Yes, even now. Because you and Brielle are more than the mistakes you've made, just as I am more than mine." He nodded slowly, absorbing this. "The house we bought. It's not what we originally wanted, but it's actually perfect for a growing family. 3 bedrooms, a yard, good school district. Sometimes what we need isn't what we think we want. Wisdom often comes from unexpected places, I agreed. We're having the nursery painted next month. Maybe. Maybe you'd like to see it? Help us choose some books for the baby's library? The invitation was tentative, cautious, a small bridge across a still substantial divide. I'd like that, I said simply. As the evening progressed, I found myself watching Brielle and Kieran as they moved through the reception, greeting guests and sharing quiet moments of connection. There was a genuineness to their interaction that reassured me. This marriage, despite its less extravagant trappings, was built on something real. "They look happy," Malcolm observed, appearing at my side with 2 flutes of champagne. I had invited him as my +1, and he had navigated the potentially awkward social dynamics with graceful ease. Genuinely happy, not just wedding day happy. "I think they are," I agreed, accepting the champagne. "And I think they'll work to stay that way." Malcolm's hand found mine beneath the table, a quiet gesture of support that felt both new and somehow familiar. "Are you ready to leave soon? The symphony benefit starts in an hour." We had planned to attend the Harborview Symphony's winter fundraiser after making an appearance at the wedding, my first attempt at balancing family obligations with my emerging personal life. "Actually," I said, "I think I'd like to stay a bit longer, if you don't mind missing the first part of the concert." Malcolm smiled, understanding immediately. "Some moments shouldn't be rushed," he agreed. Later that evening, as Brielle prepared to leave for her honeymoon, she sought me out for a final embrace. "Thank you for being here," she whispered. "It wouldn't have been right without you." "I wouldn't have missed it," I assured her. "Go enjoy Bermuda. We'll talk when you return." As Malcolm and I finally departed for the symphony, snow began to fall. Gentle flakes drifting lazily through the night air, each one unique and perfect in its complexity. "Beautiful night," Malcolm observed, his arm warm against mine as we walked to the car. "Yes," I agreed, glancing back at the conservatory where Brielle's wedding had unfolded, smaller than planned, more modest than envisioned, and somehow more meaningful for those very reasons. A beautiful beginning. 3 months later, I stood in a freshly painted nursery, arranging classic children's books on white shelves while Julian assembled a crib nearby. Sophia, now visibly pregnant, directed the placement of a rocking chair near the window that overlooked their modest backyard. "A little to the left," she instructed. "We want to catch the morning light for feeding time." The easy domesticity of the scene was still fragile, our relationships healing, but not yet fully restored. Julian and I had established a pattern of weekly dinners, sometimes with Sophia, sometimes just the 2 of us. Brielle and Kieran, back from their honeymoon and settled into married life, joined us occasionally. We didn't discuss the revised estate plan or the scholarship foundation directly, though both Julian and Brielle had received formal notification from my attorneys. Instead, we focused on rebuilding connections that weren't defined by financial support, sharing meals, exchanging ideas, creating new memories. "We found out yesterday it's a boy," Sophia announced, her hand resting on her growing belly. "Julian wants to name him after his grandfather, but we're still discussing middle names." "Everett," Julian said suddenly, looking up from the crib instructions. "Everett Julian Mercer. What do you think?" Everett, a name so close to my own that the connection couldn't be mistaken. A deliberate acknowledgement, a gesture of reconciliation. "It's perfect," I said, my voice steady despite the emotion tightening my throat. Later, as we shared dinner around their new table, the conversation flowed more easily than it had in months. Julian discussed a potential promotion at work. Sophia shared stories from the pediatric ward, and I found myself talking about Malcolm and the deepening connection between us. "He sounds wonderful," Sophia said warmly. "You should bring him next week." "I'd like that," I replied, surprised by how much I meant it. "He's been asking to meet you both." As the evening wound down, Julian walked me to my car. The spring air was cool but not cold, carrying the promise of renewal after winter's dormancy. "Auntie Ev," he said as I unlocked the door, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about aligning your financial support with how you're treated, not with how you hope to be treated." I turned to face him, curious where this was leading. "At first I was angry," he admitted. "I felt like you were punishing us for not meeting some unspoken expectation. But lately, I've been wondering if it wasn't actually the most loving thing you could have done for us." "How so?" I asked. "Because it forced us to examine what really matters. When the financial safety net was removed, we had to confront the reality of our choices, not just practical ones, like which house we could afford, but moral ones like how we treat the people who love us most." He hesitated, then added, "I'm not saying I'm glad it happened this way, but I think maybe we needed the wake-up call." His insight surprised me, both its clarity and its humility. "Growing up is a lifelong process," I observed. "For all of us." "Including you?" he asked, a hint of his old teasing smile returning. "Especially me," I acknowledged. "I'm still learning to balance giving with self-preservation, love with healthy boundaries." As I drove home that night, the cityscape glittering with lights, I reflected on the journey of the past year. The pain of exclusion at Julian's wedding had triggered a cascade of changes, some difficult, some ultimately healing. The Mercer First-Generation Scholarship Foundation was now fully operational, with 5 students from Larkfield already accepted for the fall semester. My relationship with Malcolm was deepening, bringing unexpected joy and companionship. And my connections with Julian and Brielle were transforming into something more balanced, more honest, and perhaps ultimately more sustainable. Not all wounds heal completely. Some leave scars, visible reminders of past pain that fade but never disappear entirely. The family portrait at Julian's wedding would always remain incomplete, that exclusion a permanent marker of a specific moment in our shared history. But perhaps the true measure of healing isn't the absence of scars, but the ability to move forward despite them, to build something new and valuable from the fragments of what was broken. The following weekend, I hosted a dinner party at my apartment, a small gathering bringing together previously separate parts of my life. Malcolm arrived early to help with preparations. Julian and Sophia came bearing a bouquet of spring flowers. Brielle and Kieran brought dessert from a patisserie we had discovered together years earlier. And 2 of my Scholarship Foundation board members joined us, eager to share updates on the program's progress. As we gathered around my dining table, the conversation flowing between these once distinct spheres of my existence, I felt a sense of integration that had been missing for too long. This wasn't the life I had planned. It was richer, more complex, less certain, and infinitely more authentic. The inheritance I had originally designated for Julian and Brielle had been redirected, creating opportunities for students who might otherwise never have had them. But the true legacy, the one that couldn't be quantified in financial terms, would always be the relationship itself, with all its imperfections and possibilities. That night, after everyone had gone and Malcolm had fallen asleep beside me, I stood at my window watching the harbor lights shimmer on the dark water. Somewhere across the city, Julian and Sophia slept in their modest home, their son growing steadily beneath her heart. Brielle and Kieran were planning their future, balancing dreams with practical realities. And in Larkfield, 5 students were preparing for opportunities they had once thought impossible. All of these lives had been altered by a single decision to align my financial support with how I was treated, not with how I hoped to be treated. It hadn't been about punishment or retribution, but about truth and self-respect. About recognizing that genuine family bonds transcend financial transactions, withstanding even the most painful recalibrations. I had excluded Julian and Brielle from my investment portfolio, But in doing so, I had ultimately invested in something far more valuable: our ability to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than financial dependency. And that, perhaps, was the most worthwhile investment of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.